if there's one thing that Singaporeans go crazy for, it's JB. And with the new Rapid Transit System, or RTS Link, set to open in January 2027, Singaporeans are expected to increase the number of trips and spend some $1 billion more each year in JB. But visitors from the other side aren't expected to send as much business our way. JB visitors are projected to spend about $756 million more. That's a $290 million net increase in outbound spend each year, or about 0.4% of the country's total retail and food and beverage sales in 2025. So how are Singapore-based and homegrown businesses going to cope with more of us doing our shopping, eating and splurging in JB, especially with such a favourable exchange rate? Can local retail and F&B businesses, which are already struggling with rent and manpower costs, cope with the added pressure? Welcome to another episode of The Usual Place, the podcast where we have real conversations about the headlines. I'm Natasha, and to talk us through what could happen when the RTS Link opens, I have Musa Fazal, the Chief Policy and Operating Officer at the Singapore Business Federation. You're not new to the couch, but I want to talk a little bit about the Federation. It's a business chamber that has more than 34,000 members across different industries, and it helps companies advocate for change or create partnerships. Thank you for coming back again.
Thanks for inviting me, Natasha. Thank you.
All right, so we'll get into all of it. But next to you on the couch, I also have Ang Yut, who is the president of the Association of Small and Medium Enterprises. And the organization looks at the growth of SMEs in Singapore. You're also the founder and chief executive of web consultancy, the Adventus Consultants. And the other important thing about you that's very relevant to this conversation is that you moved to JB 18 months ago to kind of get a lay of the land and see in real time what's changing. So I'm very excited to tap on your experience because I mentioned a lot of numbers, but Musa, I want to start with the report. So these numbers are coming from a report that came out in July, and basically it studied the impact of the RTS on Singapore's retail and F&B sector. So it was commissioned, some background, it's commissioned by the SBF together with the Restaurant Association of Singapore and the Singapore Retailers Association. So we know that Singapore consumers are definitely excited about the opening of the RTS Link because we just had a 15-minute conversation about what to do there. But are Singapore businesses feeling the same excitement?
It's a good question. I suppose businesses in the F&B and retail sector are concerned, and that was the impetus for doing the study. So we wanted to understand what the impact would be, how big of an impact it would be, and then to think through some of the things that we could do to help our businesses to get through this more competitive environment going forward. But I suppose one of the things that we wanted to do in the study was also to set some of those numbers in context. So the numbers that you describe talk about the incremental spend post-RTS, but we also looked back 3 years to look at the changes in spending patterns and behaviors over the last 3 years. And we worked with our knowledge partner, MasterCard, in order to be able to look at credit card, debit card transaction data, to be able to look at the spending patterns and behaviors. So what we see is that actually Singapore consumers are already spending a lot more in JB, even without the RTS. So if we compare, for example, spending at the start of 2023 and spending at the end of 2025, so over a 3-year period, actually spending by Singaporeans has pretty much tripled. And it's increased across pretty much all categories. Although the categories where Singaporeans are spending the most are groceries and food products, dining services, drugstores and toiletries, and beauty and spa services. So those are the top 4 categories that Singaporeans, if they go over to JB, that they spend on. But they're spending across all categories. But the other thing that we wanted to also look at in the study was how are JB consumers spending in Singapore? And we do see that their spending has also increased, but it's not increased to the same multiple as the Singapore spending in JB. So over the last 3 years, JB spending in Singapore has about doubled, which is still significant, right? So I suppose one of the questions in the study is how can we amplify this in order to moderate the impact on some of our businesses from the outbound spend?
So I'm going to pull you in here. What are you hearing as well? Is it almost what Musa is telling us?
Yeah, of course. If you look beyond just the F&B and retail, I think businesses on the broader sense is also looking at JB increasingly as a place to look at in terms of expansion. And expansion, whether it's about market access or in terms of offshoring or having your back office sitting there. And we're seeing a lot more interest over there because I think we've been talking about it a while. And I think businesses typically are a bit cautious and they want take a wait and see attitude. And now I think more are actually going over there to look at potentially hiring, setting up an office. And of course, for people in the manufacturing or requiring industrial spaces, they are exploring that. So we are seeing interest in that sense. And also back towards Singapore, I think a lot of Malaysian businesses still look to Singapore as a place where they'd like to set up because we are well known for good governance, we are well known as a brand. So many Malaysian businesses also have the aspiration to have an entity here, and maybe ultimately listing here if that makes sense for them, or dual listing.
So going back to what you said, Musa, how exactly will consumer spending change when the RTS is up?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were able to do in the study is to distinguish between consumers which are private transport users versus the ones that are public transport users. So I mentioned to you about the different categories that Singaporeans typically spend on. So typically, private transport users will spend more on groceries and food products, drugstores and toiletries, because there's more room to carry it back. Whereas if you're a public transport user, you tend to spend more on services. So your dining services, your beauty and spa services. And what we do see when we speak to consumers about how their spending patterns might potentially change going forward, we see that some of the private transport users are going to switch to RTS. And when they switch to RTS, their spending behavior tends to resemble the public transport users a bit more.
I feel like the drivers say this, but they won't do it.
Yeah.
I feel like they say it, but
it's interesting.
Yeah.
So the private transport users also say that they're going to increase the number of trips to JB. And so one hypothesis that we have to explain this is that they're expecting that the jams at the Causeway are going to come down because some people are going to switch and use the RTS. So maybe can afford to make more trips to JB via public transport.
So we kind of have a sense of what the Singapore traveller is like and what they do there, but what are the JB travellers like, especially now with the RTS going to open?
Yeah.
Are we going to see a specific type? Can we tell who they are?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So the Singapore consumer in JB tends to spend across a range of categories, retail categories and F&B categories. So the way that we've been describing it in the study is the Singapore consumer behaves like a local when he spends in JB, but the JB consumer in Singapore behaves like a tourist. So if he comes to Singapore, he spends on shopping, and he tends to spend in the central region. So one of the things that we found in the study is that even though there's 756 million of inbound spend, a lot of that, 80% of that is concentrated in the central region. So that means for the F&B and retailers that are in the heartland areas, they're not benefiting as much from the inbound spend that's coming from JB. And the JB consumer also tends to spend at tourist attractions, tends to spend on events. So when we look back historically over the last 3 years, there's a surge in spending around the time of Taylor Swift concerts, F1, and so on. So that's the shape and complexion of the JB consumer. So I think one of the things that we try to do in the study is to ask ourselves, okay, if that's the type of consumer that's coming in, how do we build on that, right? For example, if more JB consumers are coming in for events, what can we do in order to allow the F&B and retail in the heartland areas to benefit from some spillover from the events that are happening over here? Can we bundle certain types of activities and packages so that some of the F&B and retail can also experience it? Because a lot of visitors and tourists that come into Singapore want to experience something local. So actually, is there a uniquely Singaporean experience that we can bundle together with an event, the F1, right? That takes a visitor to somewhere in the heartlands, for example, and experience the F&B and retail there.
But hearing this, right? So as for heartland shops, because as Musa said, the central area is going to benefit the most. But for heartland shops or mom and pop retailers, like your small cafe owners and restaurants, these businesses already deal with high rent and labor costs. And if they're not really going to benefit from the RTS, does it seem like this is another nail in the coffin for these already tough times?
Yeah, I think that it is challenging running a small mom and pop shop in heartland, especially in these times, especially in the future when you are now going to be dealing with competition from across the Causeway. And a lot of these companies, small businesses are dealing with a lot of cost pressures. And I think that if people, like what Musa said, people travel for experiences. And if you go across the Causeway to Malaysia, you want to experience food. Now, I think Singapore has got good food. I think we can do a lot better in terms of promoting it as a region or as a constituency. What is Woodlands known for? What is Sembawang known for? If you go across the Causeway to Malaysia, there are different tamans, Sentosa, Taman Pelangi, what's there. So in Singapore, I think we can do a lot more there. I think the other part is that costs, if we can manage it, that's a big part to play. Because there are two parts, right? You increase demand and you look at costs. And if we can manage costs, I think it gives the businesses some leeway and some room and breathing room to manage if there is a variation in terms of demand. At least they don't get tipped over into the red so fast. I think that's an area that we can look at. The other area is how do we pull different small businesses together and collectively, brand them. And that becomes an attraction.
Are you already hearing people say, I might have to close down in a year or two because of the way the landscape is right now? And so this RTS Link opening is just another reason to...
And
to do
if
business.
you speak to some of the hawkers and you speak to some of the businesses on the ground, they are very close to the edge. They are either treading water, some months in the red, some months maybe doing a bit more. So it doesn't take much for them to tip over and just call it a day. And how do we deal with that, right? Local economy at this point in time isn't doing that great for the vast majority. And I think the F&B and retail is one of the majorly hit, primarily affected sectors.
So, Musa, hearing this, what do you say? Because how do businesses here compete when the exchange rate exchange rate makes spending so much more attractive? Then how, and also the experiences in JB are just way more exciting than they are here. You can start an alpaca cafe if you wanted to in JB. You can't do it here. So Musa,
that's a good point. That's a good point about
the
the policy environment to allow some of our businesses to innovate. In our report, we tried to put together some recommendations to the government. So the whole purpose of this was to try and brainstorm collectively and think through some possible things that we can do to help our F&B and retail businesses. And broadly, 3 buckets of recommendations. One is how can we stimulate local spend, get Singaporeans to spend more locally, right? And we've got a couple of recommendations in that area. One, drawing on the experience of the Hong Kong government when the XRL was introduced between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And the Hong Kong government there did quite a bit to help their local businesses. They introduced quite a number of different types of consumption vouchers. Consumption vouchers targeted at different consumer segments, targeted at different neighborhoods and so on. So the question is whether we can take a leaf from that and do something to help to stimulate local consumption here. But beyond that, I think going back to what you had said, how can we help our local businesses when it comes to the top line? How can we help them to innovate and create value so that Singaporeans still want to spend here? and what can we do in order to be able to support that? What is the policy environment, the regulatory environment that enables it? So, for example, I mentioned drugstores and toiletries will be quite heavily hit. A lot of Singaporeans go over to JB to get their medicines, to get their supplements and so on, right? And a lot of their household products. So some of the pharmacists over here have pointed out that in some other countries, pharmacists are allowed to dispense medicine, which they can't do in Singapore. And is it possible for us to come up with an environment where we can have community pharmacists? Because then that provides an additional value, right, to the consumer, and it might make them want to come over here. So thinking through some of the policy environment changes in order to be able to stimulate innovation. But then the bottom line as well, I think going back to what you said, what can we do in order to be able to help businesses to manage costs? And what are some of the ways that maybe some of the recent policy changes which introduce additional costs? A lot of the businesses in F&B and retail rely on foreign manpower. And this year in the budget, there was a across-the-board increase in levies for all of the different work pass categories. So is that something that can maybe be deferred for a little while to help businesses cope with this increase in competition? Because yes, we want businesses to innovate and become more productive, but it takes time. It's not something businesses can do overnight.
Yeah, I thought I'd add, right, because I've been JB for a while and looking at the local businesses, you realize that if you can cap your cost to a certain degree, very likely it's a certain percentage of where the economy is. What it results in is that it increases the appetite of the business owner to take risks and innovate. One of the reasons I think in Singapore you see so many cookie cutter examples, you have a tea shop starting up and then you have suddenly everywhere it's tea shop, it's because people are very risk adverse. But the risk averseness is also because it's very costly to make a mistake. In JB, rentals are so much lower. You can experiment. And you see very interesting cafe ideas over there that you don't see here. Because over here, you can't risk making a mistake. So what we want to do is get a better balance, in my view, to foster more innovation. And a large component of it is to bring the cost down to a point where it's worthwhile for the entrepreneur to invest and to innovate and afford to fail.
Yeah, take some risk.
That's right.
You need to be able to afford to
make the cost of failure lower.
Yeah.
And part of it includes the rental, the upfront cost, the reinstatement cost, and renovation costs, a lot of that. And if you can bring that down, you make our business community a lot more vibrant, a lot more innovative. And I think Singaporeans are very innovative if we allow them that space to innovate.
Yeah.
So what's stopping the government from actually coming in to say, let's help businesses this way?
I think that if you look at how our policies are done, we do follow how we've used to been doing it in the past. And I think if you look at now the way global competition is like, if you look at how RTS may be like, how Singapore is rapidly becoming one of the most costly place in the world to do business, we may want to be actively thinking of a very different approach. I was sharing with you about places in Tokyo where even though rentals are very high, you still see very local artisan shops. And if you study deeper, there is very active curation and intentional structuring of the rental and rent controls over there to ensure that the local businesses maintain and have a presence in these locations. And I think if we really want to have that diversity and that local culture and that Singapore flavor to things and not have Misha everywhere. I think that we have to actively do that, and maybe a new approach needs to be taken and looked at.
So I want to hold on to that thought. I'll come back to retail diversity in a bit, but banking on what Musa said earlier about some of the recommendations. So there's these CDC type vouchers that the study or their policy recommendations, right? Very temporary in a sense, and what we are trying to look at is there's a more permanent solution. So is offering, CDC vouchers and expanding it to more shops, is it just a band-aid for now?
Well, band-aids are still useful, right? Every now and then you need
Fair point.
You need time for the wound to heal, right? So I think giving businesses a little bit of a breather, giving them some of the space to be able to experiment, innovate, risk take is still something that's important. So I think we do see the consumption vouchers as providing a little bit of that breathing space for businesses, but we don't expect it to be permanent. I don't think if our businesses rely on consumption vouchers in order to survive, that they have a sustainable business model. But in the interim, while businesses are trying to adapt and transform, may not be a bad idea. On the CDC voucher specifically, this was our Singapore version of the consumption voucher that they have in other countries. But the CDC voucher today has some restrictions, right? So you can't use it in convenience stores, even if the convenience stores are located in a heartland location. You can't use it in your malls that are located in the heartland areas. So even if the F&B and retail is as long as it's located in a mall, your CDC voucher can't be used in those locations. So question is, given that actually the impact of the RTS is going to be a lot more widespread, should we be a little bit more liberal in expanding the coverage of use of the CDC voucher so that we can provide a little bit of this breathing space to businesses?
I think it's interesting about what the numbers are saying, because I want to point this out. So the Department of Statistics Singapore said that over 60,000 businesses closed in 2025. So this is actually the highest since 2016. But actually, it also saw the most number of business formations in 2025. So over 78,000 businesses open, right? Of which over 7,000 new retail businesses and 4,000 F&B services emerged. So technically, people do want to open businesses, different types of businesses, clearly. But is the current state of where we're at, especially with retail and F&B, all that bad? Is that something we're not seeing, or is the reality on the ground a little bit different?
I think if you look at the top line stats, I think that's what it is. But if you look at your own experiences taking a walk around the malls, you will see that whether it's provision shops or whether it's you see a lot of local businesses winding up. And very often is replaced by the foreign brands, foreign businesses, foreign food businesses, and I think that these numbers therefore shows that there is a shift in terms of the mix of what are these businesses. Added on to that, if you look at the businesses that are starting up, maybe in many cases they are entrepreneurial individuals that may be doing it in a very different way. No longer your standard retail outlet that's at a HDB. I may be doing it from my home, and I'm just doing a drop shipment retail e-commerce business, and I may register a company to do that. So you may actually be seeing a lot more nano entrepreneurs, one-man show that's registered their business and they're trying something out. So I think overall the vibrancy may be declining. And you still have the very strong base of people because they may have been out of job and they start something. So it's important to peer underneath these stats and really look at what's going on, because walking around your HDB heartland, you will notice a change in the nature and the mix of the tenants. And there are many that are closed, right?
So how do we protect, heartland businesses? Because as you mentioned, the foreign brands or larger regional brands, they actually have the money to back them up in case they quote unquote fail, or they have like a slower month, or they can scale better, they can open more shops versus like a one mom and pop shop. So what protections do heartland businesses actually need?
I thought, as a context, we can also look at it from the perspective that a lot of these heartland businesses are own citizens, are own people, and they are gainfully employed, they are self-employed, and they are feeding themselves and their family, right? When they are unable to sustain, there's going to be knock-on effects across the society. I think that's one facet that we really must look at. When we say help, I think we must also think about the whole community that's going to be impacted and the urgency or importance of helping that.
Can I ask you, what are the knock-on effects that we might see?
Yeah, so knock-on effects would be like if a shop closes, whoever he buys from would be affected. Recently there was a very big food service company that well, actually it's called Food Services that just went bankrupt, right? And all the downstream suppliers are impacted, right? So that's the knock-on effect. Whoever the staff that they hire, and many SMEs actually hire people that will no longer be able to be hired by the large or multinationals. And the SMEs and these mom and pop shop, right? A lot of times they soak up the labor, and these are the people in the harder to hire segments. And if they close, you have a lot more challenges in that. That's another knock-on effect. So I was also looking at what Musa was saying about the Band-Aid help and so on. I think that one facet many people also notice is that sometimes if we give out too much support in the Band-Aid form, it may drive costs up, and now your Teh C Kosong would go from $160 to $2 in some places, $240, $250, some places. And that causes some degree of inflationary effect, right? So I think we should be looking at more modes of helping as well. Whether it is keeping rentals manageable in certain designated areas, so that it gives that area a chance to compete, in terms of price, and then innovate and have that margin and leeway to be creative. And then getting the whole area to come together, promoting it, and allow for a district, a neighborhood to be known for something, and encouraging that. I think we've got to work the ground to make sure that things happen on the ground. And I think these are new ways in which I think we can compete, because the nature of competition is very different now compared to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Musa?
No, so I agree with you. Is there more that we can do? I talked about getting the F&B and retailers involved, for example, when we organize mega events, but also how can we decentralize some of our event infrastructure, some of our tourist attractions, and then get the F&B and retail in that precinct, in that neighborhood, to be somehow involved in it, right? So we rejuvenate.
One thing I found very interesting about the study is that the people in the West is going to be quite terribly hit by this RTS Link opening, right?
Yeah, and of the various regions, so I said the Central will get the most inbound spend. So actually Central net is doing a bit better. Whereas for the other regions, actually the incremental, the worst impact is on the West. The East is not so bad. And actually the East benefits from Jewel.
It is the jewel.
Yeah, so we see a lot of JB consumers coming and spending in Jewel, and some of them maybe are just in transit, right? So they're using Singapore's connectivity to travel to other parts of the world, and they make a stopover in Jewel. But how can we have more jewels in other parts of Singapore, basically?
What is not happening in the West that they need a change? It's just not very exciting.
If you think about the East, there's a whole Peranakan culture over there. The shop houses, some of the food, the Katong area. I think that in itself has that elements of what we are talking about, that culture building. And in the West, if you ask, you'll be hard pressed to find that kind of uniqueness that people want to come and visit or take a photo of. And if you look at tourists, a lot of times they go to the East. The West is okay, but it hasn't built a culture, right? And if you're talking about attracting tourism, you've got to go beyond just serving your grassroots now. You've got to go beyond just about your HDB dwellers. You've got to think about how to make your area unique, that people want to come and visit and take photo, Instagrammable areas, unique food, and all at a very good value for money, right?
And if you think a lot of our heartland areas, actually, when we talk about decentralizing infrastructure, many of them now have quite high quality stadiums, sporting stadiums and so on, which could hold, smaller scale concerts. So maybe Taylor Swift can go to Kallang. But, a smaller band and so on could perform in a heartland area instead, and then benefit the F&B and retail around that area. Right?
So I want to pick up on an earlier point that we kept we kind of were talking about, which was diversity in retail, right? I think some people listening might be wondering, so what's wrong if I don't have that retail diversity? I get the shops that I want, but what does it mean for the larger, well, down the line and for the larger landscape?
Yeah. So if you think about it, people go to JB not to visit Uniqlo or to go and eat Mishi ice cream, right? Nor to eat McDonald's. You go there to experience what is uniquely local, the local fare, the char kway teow, the JB style, the bak kut teh JB style. So I think that it's the same. If we want to attract the tourists and if we want to maintain our culture, there needs to be something that's uniquely Singaporean that would then bring footfall to our neighborhoods. And to the people who live here, they want to maintain that complexion. They want to maintain that familiarity, right? Your uncle by the coffee shop coming down in the morning and you have your kaya toast, the same shop that's been there for the 10, 15 years, that gives you that groundedness. And I think for Singaporeans, that part of it, that rootedness, that groundedness to that community, to that neighborhood, I think is a very important part of who we are as a heritage and as people.
Yeah, we're not just the fancy skyscrapers and,
That's right, absolutely. And I think if visitors come here, they want to experience that, right? What is it that's unique about Singapore? I mean, what you said is absolutely correct about Singapore consumers in JB. So I mentioned that they spend across all categories. The one thing they don't spend more on is fast food. Because what's the point, right? If you're going to JB, you want something much more unique.
Really
right?
unique.
Yeah.
So we got to get all the American fast food in. We have Chick-fil-A. Let's see what else we can get in. But yeah, we do have some very interesting overseas concepts here that are unique to Singapore.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe we might see more of that.
Yeah.
So if you think about the big scheme of things in terms of industrial development, I think attracting foreign companies is a strategy and we should continue deploying that. But how about grooming our local and continuing to emphasize on growing local value, local innovation, value add? And this area is really around food, around retail concepts. And I think that that's an area that if we spend some time, like from the survey in SPF has done, would really bring a lot of value to our ability to compete as a nation, to innovate and continue to have that growth ladder for businesses to start off small, grow to medium size, and then ultimately to be large, like Charles and Keith and others, right?
Yeah.
So Musa, the study was made a few suggestions, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically asking the government in some of the recommendations to interfere with the free market. Right. Okay. So the government traditionally is reluctant to do it. I mean, when you say rent control, people get very scared and then they're like, oh my gosh, but what do you say to this?
Well, I think it's not something we haven't done before. So to be fair, for example, in industrial space, we do have JTC that comes in to provide subsidized rental areas. And this is to support our manufacturing sector so that they can continue to be competitive with the rest of the world. So the question is whether we can do that similarly for commercial and retail space. The government just announced some measures to reduce the rents for hawkers. So these are in government-managed spaces where hawkers operate and the markets and so on. Question is whether we can have more of those spaces. So going back to what you had mentioned, but also recognizing obviously that Singapore has scarce land resources. So we can't do this everywhere, right? But what Yit was mentioning was designated pockets of spaces where we continue to manage some of the rentals. We were talking earlier about how certain types of malls are low cost, but they tend to be a little bit more run down, I guess.
Yes.
The danger is that someone buys them over and redevelops them.
Yes.
And then once they do that, the rentals go up. And then you lose a space where some businesses would be able to.
So essentially, if you look at incubation, the concept, right? It need not be just restricted to the high growth, the sexy businesses. We should think about incubation from the perspective of all sectors, and in this case, retail concepts. I think is great. In the old days, we had Faiz Center, Faiz Square, Faiz Plaza. Faiz Plaza, right? And we were talking about Landmark, right? And a lot of
Landmark's
these
the one
places,
in, near Haji Lane, right?
Haji Lane,
where
that's right.
Now you see some thrift shops inside and very random businesses, but they're there. Yeah.
I think it's very important we have spaces like that for people to come in, experiment, try at very low cost, see if their concept works. And if it works, then move on, take a bigger space somewhere else. And if you can get a revenue share, you can get your audience, move out, right? But you need to have enough of these that stimulates that continuous innovation that happens, that continuous desire for us to keep trying new things. And I think it's very important culture that we should encourage.
I mean, we're having this conversation 6 months out from the opening of the RTS. Are we talking about this a little too late? Like, is there anything that businesses can realistically do right now to actually prep for the opening of the RTS?
I think businesses are already doing it. And as I mentioned, a lot of these changes in spending patterns and behavior have already been happening. And when we spoke to the F&B and retail businesses to validate the findings of the study, many of them were like, yeah, we know this is already happening. And a lot of businesses tell us, yes, there's going to be competition from JB, but a bigger competition for me is e-commerce, and that's been around for a long time. So I think a lot of businesses are already innovating. I mean, one of the interesting innovations that we talk about in the report is integration of F&B and retail. You see a lot more of those kinds of integrated concepts sprouting up as a way of delivering some kind of a unique experience to consumers, right? So when you go to do your shopping, there's a F&B cafe there. It makes you stay for a little bit longer, and because of that, you are browsing the items for a little bit longer, and so on. Right?
Like you see the change in the way a lot of the malls are doing it, right?
That's
a lot
right.
more F&B, a lot more experiential.
Yeah, and they're adding a lot of activities, right? So activities that appeal to a new generation of consumers, whether it's health and wellness, sporting activities, and so on, to get people to come down, right? Rather than just spending your money online. So how do you get people to come into the physical stores? But we see a lot of that kind of innovation already happening today.
So I think what Musa is pointing out too is really about adapting to the times and changes. And I think it's important that we keep innovating, and as long as we have different tiering in terms of understanding that businesses will go through different phases and allow for many of these new startups and new ideas to incubate and start low, cost low, and create that culture, I think we will be able to come up with a way to respond, and like what Musa was saying earlier, realize that our manpower cost is high. How do we keep it low enough so that our businesses have a chance to compete? Where can we keep our costs in terms of rental low enough so that we can create these innovative concepts that then will attract and then aggregate them together into neighborhoods and then pump them with events and interesting activities? I think that has a chance. So I think we should not be thinking that Singapore is a high-cost society and we must live with it. Why not be a bit different and figure out how to bring costs down in certain areas, right? And then we have that ability to have more business vibrancy. And I think that business vibrancy is very important, and allowing for some of these small boys, right, to have a bit more profit from their business allows them to take chances and innovate more.
So, Musa, when the study came out,
Yeah.
I'm sure that you have been speaking to people in the government.
Yes.
How have they reacted? Is there any indication that they will take on some of the policies? Because there were like about 10 items on the list, right? I mean, did they say that they will implement certain things, or do we have a timeline on what's going to happen?
We don't have the timeline, so unfortunately I can't share more on that. But we definitely have shared these recommendations with the government. They have promised to take a close look at them. I mean, you can see that the government is responding in different ways, right? So some of the measures that were introduced yesterday to provide some financial help to SMEs to cope with rising energy costs as a result of some of the situations in the Middle East. The attempt to help hawkers with some of the rental costs and so on. So I think the government is staging out different types of support measures that they're providing to businesses. But specifically on this issue, we had a range of suggestions. I mean, there was an interesting one in our report on the nighttime economy. And we were thinking that that's an area which is, I mean, it's not a new idea, right? But why has it not worked? Right, we've talked about this in the past, and what can we do to really reinvigorate it? Because I was reading a World Economic Forum report that 80 cities actually have a nighttime mayor who helps to coordinate the activities to try and create a vibrant nighttime economy. And he needs to work with the government agencies, with the businesses, needs to look at transportation, needs to look at security. And maybe that's something that we can do, because I think what Singapore has going for us, one of the things that we have going for us is our ability to organize and coordinate. We're good at that.
Very good. Yeah.
Our security is great.
Yeah.
So nighttime activities will be a great thing to do here.
I'm available for this job. Yeah, nighttime mayor sounds like great credential. But yeah, it's the writing on the wall for local businesses. I mean, without the implementation of these things, or will we just adapt? Will businesses just adapt to what it is?
I think that what I recommend to businesses is that you gotta go with the times. And one of the challenges for businesses is that sometimes they tend to hold on a bit too long when their businesses are not viable. And it's very normal, because as SME, for many of them, the whole their staff, the people they hire, it's all family. So they're very attached to all these people, right? And to tell them, hey, maybe you should think and consider to wind up if it's not viable. To them, they can see the pain because of the people that they hire, that 2 shop helpers that they have, they feel that they're responsible to provide for them. On the other hand, I tell them that it's important that you also must make sure that your business stays viable. And I think in this light of things, if you can innovate, think about ways to innovate, maybe open shop in JB if it makes sense, or start a joint venture. In other ways, if we can gather different businesses together and come up with something interesting, I think we should do that. So innovation's got to continue, and evolution's got to continue.
Yeah.
Musa, do you think things will even out over time, or what are some of the projected opportunities for businesses here?
Well, I think what Yit said is absolutely correct. I mean, businesses will need to think innovatively. Economists talk about churn as not being necessarily something that's bad. So it's a sign of a vibrant and a dynamic economy. But obviously there are people's lives involved, and that's what creates some of that friction. But instead of thinking of JB as competition, how about thinking of JB as a partner, right? If you're not going to be able to attract the Singapore dollar in Singapore, can you attract the Singapore dollar in JB? Right?
Yes.
And given that Singaporeans are going to go there.
Another way to look at it also is like the whole Singapore JB, if we can work together in various ways, either loosely or more coherently, attracting global interest travelers into this region.
That's right.
Would be a good way to raise the tide for everyone.
Yeah. So we, in a report, we call it a twin cities, one destination type experience. How can you create that kind of experience?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think you've given consumers a lot, because we often think about the RTS as consumers are just like, I'm getting on a train, you know what I mean? What does it mean for me? But I think in today's conversation, we've heard a lot about why we need the retail diversity and how actually consumer habits are going to change when this RTS opens. But we do need to think about decentralizing tourist spots and making our heartlands actually more appealing. And I hope the nighttime mayor actually catches on. What a great great idea. I mean, then you have someone actually like looking and focused on our nightlife, right? So thank you both for being here, and I hope it gives our viewers something to think about. And that's it for this week. Now, if you have a take on today's episode, do drop me a note in the comments section on YouTube, Spotify, or Instagram and tell me what you think. Now, if you like the episode, do share it with someone else. I will see you next Thursday.